It started with a single headline that sent shockwaves across America's heartland. U.S. corn shipments rejected. Canada quietly steps in. In one corner, you have American farmers already battling high fertilizer prices, rising transport costs, and razor-thin profit margins. In the other, you have foreign buyers, from Mexico to Europe, making cold, calculated decisions on who gets their grain business. And in the middle of it all, a White House scrambling to spin the story. President Trump, facing a critical election year narrative, reportedly erupted behind closed doors when trade reports showed not only were some U.S. shipments stalled or bypassed, but that Canada, yes, our friendly neighbor to the north, had been moving in, lining up deals, and filling shipping lanes. The U.S. thought it owned now. Some rejections are literal. Containers turned back at port because of GMO disputes or misdocumentation. Others are more subtle. Foreign buyers quietly choosing another supplier before the corn even leaves the Midwest. Either way, the end result for American exporters is the same. Empty order books where business used to be booming. But here's the kicker. This isn't just about corn. This is about how global trade pivots when trust, timing, and transport start to break down. When a tariff on ships can delay delivery more than a drought, and when quiet Canadian diplomacy can rewrite the export map without a single press conference. If you think this is just another trade story, think again. This is a case study in how you can win on paper and still lose in the market. To understand how we got here, we need to rewind to late 2024, when a simmering trade dispute between the United States and Mexico over genetically engineered corn finally boiled over. For nearly 2 years, Mexico had been pushing to limit imports of GMO corn for human consumption, citing health and environmental concerns. The U.S., backed by its powerful corn lobby, argued this was nothing more than a protectionist move dressed up as public health policy. By December 2024, the issue reached the dispute settlement panel under the USMCA trade agreement. The verdict? Mexico's restrictions had no solid scientific basis and violated its trade commitments. In theory, this was a decisive win for Washington. Mexico had 45 days to comply. And sure enough, in early 2025, the Mexican government officially removed the controversial import bans for GMO corn used in food. On paper, this meant American corn could once again flow freely south of the border. But that's where the story takes a twist. Just weeks after lifting the restrictions, Mexico's Congress passed a constitutional amendment banning the cultivation of GMO corn domestically. While this didn't block U.S. imports, it was a political move to appease domestic farmers and environmental groups. And it sent a signal to the world. Mexico's relationship with GMO crops was far from settled. That uncertainty was enough to make some importers and buyers cautious, even if the legal barriers were gone. Meanwhile, another headwind was building, and it had nothing to do with farming. In Washington, a new policy slapped steep fees, up to $1.5 million per voyage, on foreign-built cargo ships, particularly those from China. The stated goal was to bolster U.S. shipbuilding, but the unintended consequence was a shortage of bulk carriers available for grain exports. Suddenly, getting Midwestern corn to a Mexican port became more expensive and less predictable. In the world of commodity trading, delays kill deals, and buyers with tight schedules started looking elsewhere. That's where Canada comes in. While American exporters were bogged down in legal wrangling and logistical bottlenecks, Canadian grain shippers, enjoying smoother port access and no new vessel tariffs, began quietly expanding their market share, especially in Europe. And though Canada wasn't a major corn supplier to Mexico, the perception of a nimble, reliable alternative was already shaping trade decisions. So by mid-2025, we had a perfect storm. Political tension over GMOs, shipping costs climbing, and competitors finding ways to slide into the gaps. The result? U.S. corn shipments that should have been easy wins started slipping away. Not always with headlines, but with contracts quietly signed elsewhere. Let's break down the numbers, because the real story isn't just in the headlines, it's in the spreadsheets. First, the U.S. export picture. According to USDA Foreign Agricultural Service data, the 2024 corn export season was volatile. Weekly export sales swung sharply. In early July 2025, for example, the U.S. booked a surprising 1.26 million metric tons in sales, far above trade expectations. But just weeks earlier, sales had slumped well below 500,000 tons, showing how fragile demand could be when buyers hesitate. In total, the U.S. shipped roughly $14.3 billion worth of corn in 2024, translating to around 2.55 billion bushels. Mexico remained the top customer, locking in a record 17.2 million tons for the 2024/25 marketing year by February 2025. A figure that should have been a victory lap for U.S. farmers. But the reality was more complex. While Mexico's bulk purchases were steady, other key markets weren't as loyal. Enter China. Despite Brazil's slower shipments due to weather and logistics problems, China still showed little appetite for U.S. corn. Instead, they leaned heavily on South America, avoiding the U.S. supply chain for reasons that went beyond price, from geopolitical frictions to preference for non-GMO varieties. For U.S. exporters, this was a double hit, losing not only the volumes, but also the price leverage that comes with a diversified buyer base. Now Canada's lane. Canada's corn trade is a smaller slice of the global pie, but the details matter. In 2023/24, over half of Canada's corn exports went to Ireland, about 16% to the UK, and roughly 18% to the US. It wasn't about replacing American corn in Mexico, it was about seizing opportunities in the EU. Thanks to the CETA trade agreement, Canadian corn enters Europe tariff-free, a competitive edge over US shipments that face more bureaucratic hurdles. While the US fought battles over ship tariffs and GMO regulations, Canadian exporters quietly expanded in Europe, not with huge volumes compared to the US, but enough to nibble at market share in high-value, steady-demand markets. This meant that when global buyers reshuffled their sourcing, Canada was already positioned as a reliable Plan B. The logistics wildcard, that new US fee on Chinese-built ships, caused ripples far beyond the shipping industry. Bulk grain shippers faced not only higher freight costs, but also fewer available vessels. And in commodities, timing is everything. A missed shipping window can turn a profitable sale into a rejected or rerouted shipment. Several U.S. exporters reported scrambling to rebook vessels at the last minute, sometimes losing the deal entirely to a competitor with faster freight. When you put all this together, the GMO policy drama, the erratic Chinese demand, the Canadian inroads into Europe, and the shipping cost squeeze, you get a trade environment where even winning markets like Mexico can't offset the broader erosion of U.S. export dominance. Winners, at least for now, Canadian exporters to Europe. While the headlines focused on Mexico, Canada was quietly strengthening its grip on the EU corn market, with Ireland alone taking over 50% of Canadian exports and the UK grabbing another 16%. Ottawa's grain shippers capitalized on CETA's tariff-free advantage. That meant smoother paperwork, no extra duties, and faster port clearance, exactly the kind of reliability that buyers crave when the global shipping picture is messy. Every contract signed with Ireland or Spain that might have otherwise gone to the US was a small but meaningful shift in long-term market alignment, Mexican feed, and food processors. Thanks to the USMCA ruling, Mexico kept its access to high-volume, relatively affordable US corn. For producers making tortillas, livestock feed, or processed foods, that meant stability in both price and supply. A win for consumers and industry alike. In a year where global grain prices wobbled, having that lifeline to Midwestern fields was no small advantage. Losers, and the reasons why, U.S. exporters in the Chinese market. China's decision to sidestep U.S. corn, even when Brazil struggled, was a signal that market share can vanish for reasons that have nothing to do with yield or quality. Political mistrust, trade friction, and even consumer preferences for non-GMO varieties combined to keep American grain sidelined. That's a major loss, not just in tonnage, but in influence over global price benchmarks. Midwestern farmers facing higher shipping costs. The vessel tariff policy, aimed at pressuring Chinese shipbuilding, hit bulk grain exporters squarely in the pocket. With freight bills swelling and vessel availability tightening, some contracts couldn't be fulfilled on time. In a business where buyers often demand delivery windows within a few days, these missed opportunities didn't just cost revenue, they risked long-term relationships. The dynamic here is revealing. You can have your biggest customer buying at record levels and still feel like you're losing ground if other markets quietly drift away. In trade, perception matters as much as the balance sheet. And right now, the perception in some corners of the world is that U.S. corn isn't the sure bet it once was. Looking ahead, the global corn trade is heading into a period where production capacity is not the problem, competition is. USDA and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada both project record or near record harvests for 2025/26. That means the fight won't be over who can grow enough, but who can move it fastest, cheapest, and most reliably. For the US, two challenges loom large: logistics and cost control. If the vessel tariff policy continues to choke bulk shipping availability, even the most competitive farm gate prices won't secure contracts if you can't guarantee delivery. Without a rapid solution, whether through policy adjustments, targeted exemptions for agricultural shipments, or investment in alternative shipping capacity, U.S. exporters risk losing not just spot sales, but entire trade relationships. Market diversification. Relying too heavily on Mexico as the anchor customer is risky. One political shift, one regulatory reversal on GMOs, and that safe market could tighten overnight. U.S. trade policy will need to focus on regaining ground in Asia, shoring up presence in the Middle East, and countering Canada's EU advantage. Canada's path forward is clearer. As long as CETA remains in place and European buyers seek steady suppliers outside the volatile Black Sea region, Canadian corn has a built-in lane to grow market share. Add to that a relatively frictionless domestic shipping environment, and Ottawa's exporters are positioned to keep expanding quietly, unless Washington finds a way to undercut that advantage. The wild card? Global geopolitics. Any flare-up that affects fertilizer prices, port access, or currency volatility could shuffle the deck again. And in that reshuffle, the players who've built trust and streamlined logistics will be the ones holding the best cards. So here's the takeaway. Winning on paper, in courtrooms or trade panels, isn't enough. You have to win in the warehouses, on the docks, and in the minds of buyers making billion-dollar decisions. Right now, the US has the production muscle, but Canada's making the smarter plays in certain lanes. If you've been following the shifts in global grain trade, you know this is just one battle in a much bigger war for market relevance. The question is, will US policymakers and exporters adapt fast enough to stop these quiet market share leaks? Or will Canada quietly replaces US exports become less of a headline and more of a permanent reality? What do you think? Should the US double down on logistics reform, renegotiate trade pathways, or push harder on pricing to win back lost ground? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want more deep dive, fact-driven analysis on global trade battles, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown. Because in global trade, the biggest loss isn't losing a deal. It's not realizing you've lost it until it's too late.